I'm Dave Baker.
And I'm Spandrew Spice.
Welcome to Deep Cuts, the podcast where we pick a topic and walk you through the ins, the outs, and the nitty-gritty so you can appear like an interesting and idiosyncratic person at your next forced social function. Today's topic is...
Richard Montañez.
Who is Richard Montañez? He's a retired executive from the Frito Lay Corporation who spent the better part of the 2000s and 2010s touring college and corporate campuses, giving public motivational speeches about how in the late 1980s, he was a lowly, impoverished janitor working at the Frito Lay factory in Rancho Cucamonga, California, who came up with the idea for the company's most popular product, Flamin Hot Cheetos. After inventing the smash success snack, his life became a rags to riches fairy tale, going from poor working class Mexican family to a rich corporate executive overnight. His story has inspired many, tons of media and viral attention, and even resulted in a feature-length Hollywood film being developed about his life. The only problem? The entire thing is a huge lie.
Act 1. Nobody expects the Frito Bandito. Frito Lay is a snack food corporation and subsidiary of PepsiCo, which controls over half of the chip market share in North America. In 1932, during the height of the Great Depression, a man named Charles Doolin had a struggling ice cream business. Nobody was buying a relatively frivolous treat like ice cream, and he was desperate to hang up his scoop and find another more lucrative line of work. He met a man in San Antonio, Texas, who owned a business producing fried corn chips, and more importantly, cheap to make and sell, which would appeal to a consumer struggling with the financial crisis of the time. He was looking to sell the business so he could return home to Mexico, and Doolin was interested. He bought the business, including the recipe for the chips, the machinery to produce it on, and the existing customer base for $100. The chips were called Fritos. Frito meaning fried in Spanish, and unlike ice cream, Doolin had a pretty easy time selling them. He started off small, selling them out of his car and making a few bucks a day. But over time, he sold more and more of the chips. And from there, the business just grew exponentially. However, despite the company's growth throughout the 1930s, it hit a major snag in the early 40s. As World War II began, the government ordered that any factory in the US producing what they deemed as non-essential product needed to shut down and convert to producing important wartime materials. And as it happened, snack chips were on the official list of non-essential products. So Fritos and every other snack brand in the country had to shut down immediately, which was a huge hit to the company's growth. However, Doolin and Fritos would very quickly receive a massive favor from the owner of a rival chip company. You see, there was another company that had started at a similar time and in a similar way to Fritos. It was the Lay's potato chip company, owned by Herman Lay. I'm gonna pull up pictures of Robert Doolin and Herman Lay.
Let's get our This Motherfucker Looks Like on.
So this is Charles Elmer Doolin, who was the founder of Fritos, the Frito Lay company.
Is he really the founder though? He's the guy who bought it.
Well, I was gonna say creator of Fritos, but he didn't create Fritos. There was a guy that created Fritos, and he just bought the recipe from him. But I mean, the guy was like selling them out of a cart, and he turned it into a business.
Right. Charles Elmer Doolin looks like the second runner-up in a Walt Disney impersonation contest.
Yeah, I was gonna say Charles Elmer Doolin looks like Vincent Price's sickly, uncharismatic brother.
Charles Elmer Doolin looks like an AI-generated headshot for Gomez Adams' appearance in the 1961 failed pilot of the initial attempt at Addams Family.
Elmer Doolin looks like racism in the front, domestic violence in the back.
Charles Elmer Doolin looks like the type of person who looks at his son and just says, "You were a mistake."
Yeah, every day. And so that's Elmer or Charles Doolin. He was like, in the research, he was called both in a bunch of different articles and things that I was reading. Some people referred to him as Elmer Doolin. Some people referred to him as Charles Doolin. And his name, I guess, is Charles Elmer Doolin. So I don't know if he went by Elmer or what, but he was referred to different things by different people. So I'm just going to say Charles Elmer Doolin. but this is Herman Lay.
Oh, look at this. Look at this guy. Look at this motherfucker. This guy, he got laid.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah, Herman Lay looks like, biologist in the front, Ku Klux Klan meeting in the back.
Yeah. Herman Lay looks like the type of guy where you go into a convenience store and he's like, well, hello there. How y'all doing? And then as soon as you start walking out the back, he's like, all right, brothers, this is how we're going to burn down the South.
There was this guy, I was driving through Florida one time, last year, I think. We were at a gas station in Florida, and there was a dude just minding his own business, and he was some kind of worker, like he was wearing like a workman's shirt, and he was in like a work truck. So I don't know if he was like an electrician or a refrigeration person or something like that, but he was like a worker like that in a work truck, and he was Hispanic. He just happened to be Hispanic. And this guy pulled up into the gas station and he got out and he was like really in a chipper mood. And the guy was like throwing trash away from his truck into the trash can. And then other guy walked by and he was like, how you doing, my hard working friend? I like people like you that are hard workers. And then he like walked into the gas station and I was like clutching my pearls. I was like, what did he just say? What did he mean by that? And it just felt like this like condescending, like you're one of the good ones, that was just really creepy to me. And that guy looked like this. That guy looked like Herman Lay. Lay had grown up as a savvy businessman, selling Pepsi for 5 cents a bottle across the street from a baseball park, selling them for 10 cents a bottle as a young child. Eventually getting a job as a salesman for a company called Barrett Snacks. And when the company's founder died in the early 30s, Lay took out a massive bank loan and bought the company from the family for $60,000 in cash and stock, rebranding it to H.W. Lay's and eventually just Lay's. By the time World War II rolled around, Lay's was also experiencing huge growth, and Lay couldn't accept his factories being shut down by the government. But unlike Doolin, he did something about it. Lay started talking to several lobbyists, throwing his weight around and trying to convince them that potato chips should be classified as an essential product. They weren't prone to spoiling and didn't require cooking, so they'd be a perfect food source if the US was bombed and the city lost power. So this kind of feels like that whole thing from several years ago where like they had the FDA classify pizza as a vegetable so that they could get around like some kind of like laws about selling them in schools or something like that. I forget the exact details of it, but they did it as like a technicality to get around like not being able to sell them in a certain context, which I think was selling them in schools. This feels like that, where they're like, no, if the big one hits, if the Krauts get onto American soil and the power grid goes down and the supply chain falls to shit, we're all gonna survive off of chips.
They're very nutritious. Chips and cigarettes. That's all you need to survive.
Yeah. That classic Perry Como song, Chips and Cigarettes. And after months of this schmoozing with lobbyists, potato chips were officially added to the list of essential products. Lay's and Fritos were able to reopen their factories and continue selling their chips, and continued growing. More on Lay's later. By the mid-1950s, Fritos were a multi-million-dollar product based in Dallas, Texas, with a cowboy mascot called the Frito Kid. Because nothing screams corn snack called Fritos that was invented by a Mexican man like a little white cowboy character.
Yippee-ki-yay! Frito Lays!
So let's watch one of these old Frito Bandit, the Frito Bandit. The Frito Kid. That's what he's called. Let's watch one of these old Frito Kid commercials.
Hold it, ma'am. It tastes better with Frito. Get Frito.
Oh, dude, I love this. I love this little guy.
Yeah, he's like a little, he's like a little Lone Ranger Junior type character.
The fatherless ranger. Excuse me, sir. Where are your parents? I don't know. You want some chips?
I don't know, sir. They left me at a 7-Eleven whenever I was 8 months old. I grew up in it and learned to love nothing but chips as my food. It's the only way I can live.
You have adopted the chips. I was born in it.
I tried to eat a vegetable once and I went into anaphylactic shock.
It's like that. You ever see that documentary, or maybe it was a Vice video about a guy whose parents had died, I think, and his mom made him grilled cheese. Macaroni and cheese before she died, and so the only thing he could eat was macaroni and cheese. And he was like addicted to it and like literally couldn't eat anything else. He would like vomit. Have you seen that video?
I haven't seen that, but I've seen similar things. Like there's the one guy who like could only eat cheese pizza. And there was like the woman who could only eat cheesy potatoes. What's
with everybody and cheese?
I think it goes without saying. It's just the best thing. But you wouldn't understand that. You fucking weirdo. You fucking weirdo. This motherfucker doesn't like cheese.
It's not that I don't like cheese. I just don't think I like cheese the way that you do.
It's not. It's funny you say it like that, as if I'm just like some cheese fiend. But like,
Spandrew, come on, no, dude, no. When we used to work in the office, someone that we would work with would bring cheese in every so often, and you would like salivate and like you'd be like, you know how like dogs get like where they're like they see food and they just their mouth starts like chittering like. And then they just like eat without inhale. They just inhale food. They don't chew. That's how you are with cheese.
I mean, it was the greatest time of my life. It was the most delightful thing. For like 2 weeks straight, he just brought in different cheeses, and we just like during lunch we just sat and like had these like gourmet cheeses that were all like every day it was a different one, and they were like these different rare or exotic types of cheeses, and they were also like consumed in different ways. Like one day we had to use this little weird wheel thing to like slice off little slivers of the cheese. And then one day it was like you put it onto this like jalapeno jam. So it wasn't just cheese, but it was also cheese in like different unique presentations. And it was amazing. It was delightful. And you just, every single day, you just said, no, thank you.
Yes, I absolutely did. I was like, nah, I'm good. I don't need any of your weird, moldy, covered in maggot cheese. I'm all right. Thank you.
It was fucking amazing.
I'm glad that it served you and some of the other people in the office so well. I wish you all the best, and I don't want to know what parasites are currently growing in your intestinal tract from that shit.
It was just cheese.
It wasn't just cheese. There was literally one where he was like, this one was made by maggots.
It was delightful. My favorite was the sheep cheese.
Yeah, I'm good. All right. You know what kind of a cheese is all right? String. That's a good type of cheese.
You're a 5-year-old boy.
I wonder if I could be playing this up for comedy. Probably not. I probably exclusively survive on cheese that is stringed.
I mean, I wouldn't put it past you. Fucking almonds in the coffee mug boy.
Oh, I definitely did that. I got so excited about those almonds that I like made myself sick. I was like, oh my God, endless almonds? And I would just go there and fill a coffee cup with almonds, and then I would snack on them through the entire day. And I did that for like 2 weeks. And then at the end of that 2 weeks, I was like, fuck, my stomach really hurts. And then I like Googled, like, can you get sick from almonds? And it's like,
yeah, you can get like heartburn.
Yeah, if you eat too many almonds, it's like toxic. Like you can go into like toxic shock. And I was like, oh, fuck.
Yeah, you can get like really bad stomach and problems and heartburn problems. I learned that not personally, but
by watching me.
Yeah, watching you. But that was the confirmation of it. But years ago, when somebody I was living with, my roommate, they had to start alternating milks because they were drinking too much almond milk, and they just started getting really bad heartburn. And they looked into it and basically found out what you found out. And then they realized that they had to start like getting a different type of milk every other week because they were just drinking too much.
Dude, I almond too close to the sun.
Yeah, PSA. You can eat too many almonds. It's not good for you.
Learn from my mistakes.
And also almonds are like one of the most like bad for the environment like nuts to produce because they require so much water to grow.
Oh, really? Well, I feel vindicated since working in the office, I have not eaten almonds.
You did like your dad catching you smoking and like making you smoke like 3 packs of cigarettes in a day. You just like, you got it out of your system, and now you don't need to partake in the almond industrial complex anymore. Another sign of the company's success was the fact that in 1955, when Disneyland opened, Frito struck a deal to open a restaurant in the park called Casa de Fritos, a sit-down restaurant that served several Mexican dishes with Fritos incorporated. So like back in the 1950s, there was a restaurant in Disneyland that just like, it was like that show, what was that show? Chopped? Was that what it was called? That cooking show that was popular for years, where basically the point of it was they would get a bunch of chefs, like a lot of like famous chefs and also like amateur chefs, and they would compete against each other where they're like, you have to make a meal that has Gatorade and marshmallows in it. And then it was like, how creative could you make that dish with those required 2 ingredients? I think it was called Chopped. It was just a restaurant that was that, where they were like, you have to come up with an entire menu where everything has Fritos in it. This restaurant is actually the origin of what would eventually become Doritos. At the time, the kitchen staff of the restaurant would throw out stale tortillas that hadn't been served to guests at the end of the day. One of the salespeople from Fritos, Arch West, was visiting the restaurant one day and noticed this. He told the staff to start cutting up the tortillas into triangles, frying them, and serving them as table chips. Now, I want to put an asterisk there that, so this guy Arch West, as we'll read in just a second, I'm going to kind of go into it, but this guy is like, he's famous for creating Doritos, and it was like his whole personality. Like for the rest of his life, he was just the Doritos guy, and he like, you'll see how far his Doritos personality went, but he was like, that was his whole thing, was that he invented Doritos. But I want to put the asterisk there that this isn't anything I've read. This is just me purely speculating. But just based on all of the stories that you know about like people taking credit for other people's work and how businesses and corporations function, and this very story that we're talking about now with Richard Montañez, which we'll get to in a little bit, I just want to put an asterisk there that I take it with a grain of salt that this guy was the one who had this genius idea. Like he went to the restaurant and was like, hey, you guys are just throwing out these tortillas? You should start cutting them up into triangles and frying them. And there's a possibility that they were doing this and he just stole the idea and claimed it as his own. What was originally supposed to be a cost-saving measure ended up becoming the most popular item at the restaurant. Years later, Arch West would pitch the idea of turning these fried tortilla chips into a national product for the company and name them Doritos. Oro meaning gold in Spanish, the Itos at the end to make it clear it was part of the Fritos line of snacks, and according to Arch West, the D at the beginning just because he thought it sounded good. Arch West became known as the father of Doritos, and it turned into his legacy. So much so that apparently when he died in 2011, his daughter sprinkled crushed up Doritos inside of his urn along with his cremated remains. And if feeding Doritos to someone's ashes isn't the most uniquely American thing I've ever heard, I don't know what is. They fucking sprinkled Doritos in his ashes.
It's that's kind of like how was it Mark Grunwald? I think it's Mark Grunwald that co-created Sovereign Supreme, and when he died, they put his ashes in the first printing of the trade paperback. So if you have the first printing of Sovereign Supreme, Squadron Supreme, Mark Grunwald's ashes are in that.
Although that's infinitely more romantic than sprinkling crushed up Doritos in somebody's ashes. But you know what would go into what we would sprinkle into my ashes when I die? You know what it was required of you when I die was required of you to sprinkle into my ashes? Crushed up Arby's roast beef.
Fuck you. Dude, I literally almost, all this drama with you having a gimp leg now. I literally almost, because I was in Burbank a couple days ago.
You were just grieving in a weird way and you were going to go buy Arby's and eat it in my honor?
I was going to buy Arby's and then leave it at your house.
I wish you had done that. Although I don't know where you go to get Arby's. Because I don't know if you've talked about this on the show yet, but the infamous Arby's where we met, where you and Andrew did the Arby's episode and then I appeared, the appearance number 1 of Spandrew Spice, that Arby's is closed. They closed it down.
I know. I did a little dance. I was like, fuck yeah, burn it.
Spandrew Spice, appearance number 1? And you're fucking celebrating the destruction of a landmark?
Yeah, fuck that place.
You have no respect for history.
I have no respect for Arby's.
Well, we know what we'd sprinkle into your ashes. Cum jug.
Yeah.
For anybody who has, it's been mentioned on the show before, I think, but for the uninitiated listener, Dave drinks out of a large gallon tub of water, like the thing you buy at like Costco that's supposed to be like how you fill like your small bottles of water, the big like gallon or maybe it's even 2 gallon like jug of water. He just drinks straight out of that And he also has the background blurring on his Zoom screen. And when every single time he lifts up the jug to drink out of it, it gets it confused with the background and it blurs it. And so when the visual effect of that is that it looks like he's drinking something that's being censored. Like, that's what it looks like when you look at it. The first time it happened, I laughed out loud because it looks like it's being censored, like on TV. And so ever since then, I've said that he's just drinking a jug of cum. That's what that is.
I love it. Delicious.
But Doritos weren't actually realized into a product until years later in 1964. For the time being, there was another product in the Fritos line that was about to drop that is much more relevant to our story. After the success of Fritos, Doolin was looking for the next big product to expand the brand. A few years earlier, in the late 40s, he allegedly personally invented a new type of crunchy cheese snack made from leftover powdered cheese from World War II that was meant to be a combination of cheese puff and Fritos. And with the success of the company, they brought this invention to market and named it Cheetos, a combination of the word cheese and Fritos. But with increased success and scale of sales came a problem: supply chain and distribution. It was becoming increasingly difficult for Fritos to make enough of their product to ship around the country with their existing factories. Luckily, Lay's had the exact same problems. While Fritos was based in Texas with factories in and around the West Coast and Southwest, Lay's was the opposite, being founded in Tennessee with factories in the South and East Coast. They both needed a way to better reach consumers in the regions where they didn't have factories, and so they struck up a deal. They would license each other to produce their products in their respective factories. Lay's able to produce Fritos and Cheetos for the East Coast, and Fritos able to produce Lay's potato chips for the West. This situation worked out very well for both companies and helped to massively expand through the late 50s and early 60s. And while the company's founder, Charles Doolin, died of a heart attack in 1959, the company and its partnership with Lay's carried on. In fact, it worked out so well that in 1961, the two companies decided to merge and become Frito Lay, with Herman Lay becoming the CEO of the new merged company. At this point, Frito Lay was the best-selling snack brand in the United States, but now they had another problem. They had become so big that they were actually struggling to keep up with the demand for their product. They needed some bigger firepower on the distribution side. So Herman had an idea and turned to the company that really started his career all those years ago when he was an 11-year-old kid. In 1965, after negotiations opened up by Herman Lay, Frito Lay was bought by Pepsi, which then rebranded to become PepsiCo to encompass all their newly acquired properties. And while the companies were all one on paper, part of the agreement allowed Frito Lay to continue independently operating as its own company with Lay remaining as the CEO. So I didn't know any of this stuff. I assumed that Frito Lay, I mean, I don't think I even knew that Frito Lay were like separate companies. I thought that was just Frito Lay and it was a combination of two products that were like their most popular or something. And I just assumed that they got bought by Pepsi in like the 90s or something like that. Like back whenever these like major corporate consolidations really started to ramp up, leading up to now where there's just like three companies that exist. I had no idea that there was this big corporate consolidation happening in like the 1960s. I didn't really know that that was like a big thing that was happening.
I didn't know that it was happening in connection with chips. But that's because, frankly, I don't know that I spend a lot of time thinking about the history of chips.
The chip empire. I mean, but you know, if you learn anything from the Chiquita Banana episode, you can't underestimate the goofiest of foods. Throughout all this time, the Frito Kid was still the mascot for Fritos corn chips. But in 1967, Fritos rebranded with a new mascot called the Frito Bandito. And while we've been relatively safe thus far, things are about to get a little racist.
I heard you want to be a Frito Bandito like me. You too? Then you must sing the Bandito song. Let's sing together. You just follow the bouncing Fritos corn chips bag. Ay, 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 ay. I am the Frito Bandito. Yay! I like Fritos corn chips. I love them, I do. I want Fritos corn chips. I'll get them from you. Ay, 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 ay. Oh, I am the Frito Bandito. Give me Fritos corn chips in.
Is that Mel Blanc?
Yeah. If it's not obvious or apparent, the Frito Bandito is voiced by Mel Blanc, just doing the Speedy Gonzalez voice exactly. And yeah, it's not a great look. Especially because they had like a perfectly fine mascot before, the Frito Kid. He was just a little cowboy child. But this wasn't like the fact that it's a white guy doing this over the top Mexican stereotype accent is not a good look. The content itself, it's not like the most outwardly offensive. Like if you remember in the Chiquita Banana episode, there was that commercial where Chiquita Banana goes to Africa and there's like a African cannibal and she teaches him how to eat bananas and it makes him more sophisticated. Like that was like ghoulish levels of racism. That wasn't as bad as that, but it got worse. And there was definitely some like really leaned in racism that was associated with this character, as we'll read on. But that was like the only clip that I could find to really show. However, many people weren't happy with the Frito Bandito, and after many consumer petitions, several local TV stations that refused to air the commercials, and a class action lawsuit, they dropped the mascot in 1971 and replaced him with W.C. Fritos, for some bizarre reason, Frito-themed parody of W.C. Fields.
I love this.
So they go from like this weirdly racist, like not kosher Mexican mascot character that's just like, well, that wasn't a great move, that thankfully was like, even back in the late 60s was kind of stricken down. They were like, no, we don't want this. But then they go to this bizarre thing, which we're gonna watch right now.
W.C. Fritos here with a free offer and specially marked 6 packs of Fritos brand corn chips. An autographed poster of W.C. Fritos. Ah, yes. Hang it in an appropriate place of honor, like over your frog collection.
You can get your free W.C. Fritos poster in specially marked 6-packs of Fritos corn chips.
Yes, indeed.
For a
that is so understated. I was expecting it to be like ridiculous, but it's just W.C. Fields talking about Fritos.
Yeah. What?
W.C. Fritos here. Also, they missed the opportunity to say it was a Fritos poster. They just said it's a free poster.
I mean, it's so bizarre in how just like you said, kind of understatedly weird it is. It's like, it's not like crazy, but it's just like, why? This is like if in the 90s, instead of Macho Man Randy Savage being the spokesperson for Slim Jim, it was just like their mascot was Slim Jim Carrey.
Or like Jimmy Stewart. He was like, yeah, I'm just
Slim Jimmy Stewart.
Slim Jim. I'm Slimmy Jimmy Stewart, see?
Yeah, if it was just Slim Jimmy Stewart, and that was their mascot.
I kind of love this idea though. Can we pitch this to Slim Jim right now? Slimmy Jimmy Stewart?
Use the W.C. Fritos as like an example of like, this is a real thing. Like, we're not fucking crazy. Like, this was done.
Yeah, Clarence, I want a Slim Jim again.
That's what this was. It's very strange. It's very strange. And then eventually in the late 70s, he was replaced by the Muncha Buncha ad campaign because having a mascot at all just wasn't working out for Fritos. So this was the eventual sort of like advertising campaign they landed on.
Muncha Buncha, Muncha Buncha, Muncha Buncha, Muncha Buncha, Fritos go with lunch. Muncha Buncha, Muncha Buncha, Muncha Buncha, Muncha Buncha, Fritos go with lunch.
Nothing gives your old lunch a munchy new twist like Fritos brand corn chips. So munchy, so full of good corn taste.
So, you know, pretty standard, pretty normal. Nothing crazy or funny about that. But I just wanted to show that basically after 10 years, they're like, all right, we had a good decade of just letting the CEO's nephew come up with our shit, and he led us down some bad paths. Let's just do some normal shit now. Meanwhile, Cheetos, which was quickly becoming one of the most popular products sold by the newly formed Frito Lay Corporation, had a mascot of its own, but not the one you're thinking of. The original mascot for Cheetos was a mouse.
I most heartily recommend Cheetos, cheese-flavored puffs. They have real cheese flavor and come in 2 kinds of crunches, baked to a delicate crunch and quick fried to a crackly crunch. Cheetos, cheese that goes.
That animation is actually really nice.
Yeah, it's good. And not like weirdly racist or just like a bizarre postmodern parody of W.C. Fields. But of course, you can't stop progress. And by the mid 80s, Fritos themselves no longer had a mascot or catchy jingle at all. But Cheetos was rebranded with the mascot that we all know and love. I guess if you love chip mascots, Chester Cheetah.
Cheetos brand cheese-flavored snacks presents Chester Cheetah.
I'm a righteous kitty in the heart of Hip City. Till I see those Cheetos. Then I get loopholes in my scruples. For the cheese that goes.
Crunch. This kind of actually made me think about this for the first time, because like it's just so ubiquitously associated with it that I'm just like, yeah, Chester Cheetah, that's the fucking mascot for Cheetos. And then like when I saw the mouse, I was like, oh, this is weird. But then I was like, wait a minute, a mouse makes way more sense. It's like cheese. And then I was like, why is it Chester Cheetah? Why is that the mascot? I mean, Cheetos, cheetah, I get that, but like,
yeah, but also cheetahs aren't known for liking cheese. Like, just because they're big cats, like, what?
Yeah, it is. It made me think about for the first time that Chester Cheetah is an odd mascot for that character. And I get now they make commercials like intentionally weird. Like all commercials now are just like contrived, abstract postmodernism. But this was back in the 80s. And Cheetos became one of the most popular products in a massive portfolio of snacks, such as Lay's, Ruffles, Doritos, Tostitos, Funyuns, Sun Chips, and many more. But we don't care about any of that. We care about Cheetos. And here in the late 70s is where our story really begins, and where our main character, Richard Montañez, enters the picture. From this point on, we are going to tell Richard's story as he tells it, both in his several autobiographical books and speaking tours, as well as in the movie made about his life that was released in 2023 called Flamin Hot. Act 2. It ain't easy being poor in the United States. Prior to the early 80s, Frito Lay had consistently controlled no less than 50% of the market share of snack foods in the US basically since their inception. They were far and away the best-selling line of snacks, and essentially had a monopoly on store shelves everywhere, especially since merging. But then something happened. Anheuser-Busch, the company that produces Budweiser, decided to get into the snack food game and launched a brand called Eagle Snacks. Because of an aggressive marketing campaign with tons of beer money behind it, for a certain point in the 80s, Eagle Snacks were able to eat up enough market share of snack foods that Frito Lay dipped below 50% for the first time ever, and it really worried them. As a result of this major shakeup in the snack foods market, Frito Lay made a drastic decision. They were going to take a much-needed re-examination of the product strategy that had been working for them for 5 decades. They were going to sink a ton of money into market research and product development in order to come out with an innovative new line of products and yank that market share back from the jaws of hoppy defeat that was Anheuser-Busch. But that money for research needed to come from somewhere. So in the late 80s, they decided to lay off over 1,000 workers across the country from their various factories producing existing products. It was a surprising and devastating turn for Frito Lay workers during an economic boom in the 80s that was supposed to spell job security and infinite room for growth. Suddenly, nobody's job was safe. But to take a step back for a second, years earlier in 1976, a Frito Lay factory in Rancho Cucamonga, California, hired a new entry-level janitor named Richard Montañez. Montañez was born in Ontario, California, and grew up in a migrant labor camp in Guasti, an unincorporated community in Los Angeles. He had a rough childhood marred by constant bullying and racism from his classmates at school, as well as a learning disability that prevented him from being able to fully learn how to read or write, which followed him into adulthood. Despite Richard's setbacks, he was so ambitious, imaginative, and most importantly, a born salesman. His mother would send him to school with delicious homemade Mexican dishes for lunch, such as burritos and tamales, which he'd be teased about by his fellow students who viewed the food as low class and, quote, disgusting. But instead of feeling shame at this incessant teasing, Richard went the other way with it. He challenged his bullies to try his food, and when they did and realized it was delicious, they wanted more. And Richard could give them plenty more where that came from. For a price. He started selling his mom's cooking at school and turning cash for himself hand over fist. And Richard might have had a bright future from there on out if it wasn't for 2 significant factors: his aforementioned learning disability and an abusive father. Richard received many a beating from his rough, extremely traditional alcoholic father, and it seemed like even Richard's salesmanship and creativity couldn't overcome the critical mass of trauma and adversity he faced between his school and home life. By the time he was in his teens, he was involved in that other type of sales, pushing drugs on the streets. He was heavily involved in gang activity, constantly in trouble with the law, and dealing with alcohol problems of his own. Richard may have ended up just another statistic if it weren't for one simple ray of hope: his wife, Judy. The couple were married in the early 70s, and Judy quickly got pregnant. But Richard was still heavily involved with gangs, drug pushing, and sometimes theft. In fact, the catalyzing moment in his life was when he got busted for stealing a car, and partially because of his soon-to-be-born first child, and partially because he lucked out and got a very empathetic judge, he actually didn't catch any prison time and was instead let off with an extremely sobering sentence of community service. After this massive close call, Richard decided to go straight, stopped hanging out with his gang buddies, and got a real job. The only problem was that he had no real prior work experience, a criminal record, literally couldn't read or write, so he could barely fill out a resume, much less do any work that required those skills, and also was Mexican, which at the time was a massive hindrance to getting any kind of job in the US. After beating the pavement for months, passing out his resume that his wife helped him type up to every job opening he could find, getting almost universally rejected across the board, and on the verge of returning to selling drugs so he could afford to feed his newborn child, eventually he finally had a breakthrough. He scored an interview with a Frito Lay factory in Rancho Cucamonga and was able to use his natural sales ability to sell himself as a diamond in the rough. Someone with no experience and a seedy past who was nevertheless willing to do whatever it took to excel at any job he was given. And the plant manager took a chance on him. He was hired as a janitor at the factory. Richard kept to his word and attacked his job with ambition and enthusiasm. He was determined to be the best janitor the company had ever seen, but he also had an eye for more. Let's stop for a second. Now that we've gotten decently into Richard Montañez's story, but now at this place, did you know what was your knowledge about this story before this, and sort of what are your thoughts on Richard so far as we've gotten into his story a bit?
My understanding was he is a rags to riches story of a guy who was working at the factory, came up with the idea for spicy Cheetos, and then kind of became this quintessential American story, right? Of like him land of opportunitying himself out of poverty. However, as we've talked about a little bit in the previous episode, and also you've set up here, something of a little bit of an unreliable narrator to a certain extent. And the information that we're taking in some ways, checks all the boxes of the story that you're familiar with culturally, of like disadvantaged youth, comes from hard background, is trying to make it, and then gets one break and really, works his ass off to eventually become a successful person. And you want to approach that with like a, fuck yeah, dude, you did it. And then there's a cynical part of it that's like, oh no, you can't read and write? Is that real? Like, did you really overcome that? Or is that a narrative that you are just propelling so that you can kind of, move through life, as like it elevates you, you start here and then it moves you there because you're finding a way of making your story even more dramatic than it actually is. Is that real? Did he really overcome that? I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, so a couple things, just on the from like least consequential to most, the first little thing I wanted to say, just to kind of talk about a little bit, and see what your thoughts on it are. I think this might have had something to do with the fact that I moved from New Mexico to California whenever I was in high school. But I thought that Flamin Hot Cheetos were like a new thing that came out whenever I was in high school. Because I never heard of them or ever had them prior to high school, and I just assumed they were like a thing that came out in the early 2000s. And I was shocked, as much as you can be shocked about like the release timeline of a chip snack, to find out that they'd come out in the 80s. Because I literally never heard of them prior to. And also, not only had I not heard about them, but they also got massively popular whenever I was in high school. Like in 2002, 2003, Flamin' Hot Cheetos just became this fucking like phenomenon. So I just assumed they came out then, and that's why they got so popular then. I don't know how I never heard about them before that, and I also don't really understand why they got so specifically popular in like the early 2000s. But that was interesting to me. But to go back to what you were saying, that's kind of what I was expecting you to say. And the interesting thing about this is, like, so far as we've gotten into the story, this really feels like just the quintessential American dream story, right? Like it's like paint by numbers of exactly the rags to riches American dream story that you would see in some movie, like a fictional movie about like some rise to power or whatever, to the point where it almost feels too good to be true. But on that note, I think the really interesting thing here as we dig into this, and I just kind of wanted to ask you about that and then kind of put a pin in this right now before we really get into the rest of the story, is just to keep it in mind that it's, as we're going to find out, it's just a little bit more complicated than is he lying or is he telling the truth. It's going to be an interesting sort of nuanced game of trying to pick apart which parts of the story are true and which parts of the story are exaggerated for dramatic effect, like you were saying before. And eventually we might get to a place where we piece together a real timeline of events of what really happened. But I just want to keep it in mind that this isn't necessarily a story of, and this was actually something we discussed prior to doing this episode, because I was doing research on this episode and it started off as one thing. It started off as one thing, which was this guy who said he invented Flamin Hot Cheetos lied and he's a con artist, right? And that was whenever I was like, oh, we got to do this episode. And then as the research got underway, I ended up kind of realizing it was a little bit of something different than that. And we actually discussed, like, should we still do this episode? Because it's not exactly that. It's not JJ Arms of like a dude who's just like literally his whole life is a fabrication and everything he says is a lie. This is like more complicated than that. And we discussed doing the episode at all. And we ultimately obviously decided to do it. But I just wanted to put that in people's minds that don't look for this to just be like the story of like a con man who's lying about everything. Look at this story to be like much more nuanced, and try to kind of like, along with us, kind of critically think about what parts of this you think are true versus not. One other reason why I wanted to put that up there up front is because as you listen to this, I don't want you to think that you're just listening to a lie. Like I feel like if you, with it in mind that like he lied and that this isn't true, I feel like maybe some listeners could think like, okay, we're just listening to him tell his story, but the whole thing is a fucking lie, so why are we listening to this? Let's just get to the real thing. And I just wanted to put it in your mind that that's not the case, and it's important to hear his version of the story, and don't just think that you're listening to like a lie. This isn't like a, oh, it was a dream the entire time situation. During his shifts, he would sometimes get caught up watching the many machines that produced the various Frito Lay snacks, and became interested in knowing how they worked. He thought that one day, if he worked hard enough and learned enough, he could move up the ladder and become a factory engineer. He started asking around, getting pointers from other workers, and soaking up as much knowledge as he could. It was at this time that Anheuser-Busch released Eagle Snacks to the market, and Frito Lay went into panic mode. Richard had only been working with the company for a few years when they decided to start conducting massive layoffs across the country. Many of Richard's friends were fired, and though he didn't initially get put on the chopping block himself, it seemed like only a matter of time before the line item of an illiterate Mexican entry-level janitor would be swept off the ledger by the big, partially hydrogenated powers that be. Richard needed to figure out his next move. During this tumultuous time, the CEO of Frito Lay, Roger Enrico, decided he wanted to light a fire under the feet of his existing employees. They needed ideas in order to regain their precious market share from Eagle Snacks, and he believed that those ideas would come from literally anybody, be it a corporate executive or a lowly janitor. Enrico sent out a company video memo to all employees encouraging everyone to take the company's future into their own hands and take the initiative to contribute new ideas. He encouraged everyone to, quote, act like owners. And this is the other thing about this. This is where like the old idea of the American dream and the sort of like pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality kind of bumps up against some of our modern conceptions of like workplace exploitation and, you know, the distribution of wealth, because you know, as Richard tells this story and as he goes around talking about the story in his speaking events and things like that, and even in the movie, this idea of the CEO going out and talking to every employee at the company, from the highest executive to the lowest janitor, and telling them to act like owners and like take the company's future into their own hands and put the initiative in to come up with ideas. It's presented in this very positive way, like I was given this opportunity. And while, you know, whatever grain of salt this story is taken with, in the end, it worked out for Richard in some way because he really did become an executive at Frito Lay. This idea doesn't ring as valid to me anymore with my 2024 ears, because it's like, wait, you're paying like a Mexican janitor less than minimum wage, which, he's probably getting paid like a couple dollars an hour at the time, and you're going to this guy and being like, act like an owner, help this company. It's like, fuck you. Like I'm a fucking janitor. I get paid shit. Like I'm not like gonna do your work for you and like figure out your ideas. Like, give me credit for them and fucking give me points on the back end and give me like royalties or whatever, sure. But like the idea that somebody like a janitor would come up with this genius idea and then just give it to the company and be like, all right, I'm still a janitor making $2 an hour, but I saved the company. Like, fuck off.
There is another part of that too, though, that's like, how many times have you and I been in meetings with executives, and they're like, we think of this company as a family, and that to me rings that same logic, where it's like, we just want to empower all of you, the workers, to be owners, but don't unionize, but just we all are in this together. We're a family. We all own this together. Let's do this. And then this is the one out of a million people who actually like acts on that in a meaningful way and can navigate the topography of the social ecosystem of the company to actually get something done for whatever reason.
Yeah, and it's even worse in startup dynamics, because it's a smaller company that's like much less corporate, literally, than some big corporation. There's fewer people. The company is built in a more informal way. You're working in these like warehouses with ping pong tables, and the CEO is wearing like sweatpants, and he's like, in the same room as you and stuff. So they capitalize off of that aesthetic to make you even more feel like, we're all in this together. We're a family. Like, this is all of our company or whatever. I mean, you in no way, shape, or form have any ownership over it whatsoever. And all the money that we make goes to us. And then you just get your, hourly pay or whatever. But this is our company. And then they give you some like negligible, valueless stock on the back end to make you feel like you have some actual ownership of it. But they'll give you like 10,000 shares of like a billion shares, and they're worth like a penny. And then they trick you into thinking that you have to put like your fucking soul into trying to make the company work, when in reality it's like, no, this is.
I remember like one of my first jobs out of college, I had like an internship at a tech company that was founded by a guy who had made literally like, hundreds, tens, whatever, of millions of dollars off of AIDS medication. And then in Africa, one of the countries in Africa made a generic pill that didn't respect the copyright of this pill that he had, paid to get made because people were dying and they needed it. And so he would complain all the time about the millions of dollars that he lost to this government that made a genericized version of the medication that he had paid to be made. And I was like, the whole time I was like, this is insane. Like, people are dying and you're worried about not even like, oh, I got fucked and didn't make any money, but like I lost additional monies that I could have had. Crazy. And it was a tech company, and he started the company with his son, and I was just an intern, right? It's like my first job. And they were paying me nothing. Like, I won't say the number, but it's a very small number. And after working there for about 3 months, maybe. Yeah, they're paying me in almonds.
A bag of almonds a week.
After working there for about 3 months, I think, or maybe it was 6. No, I think it was 3 months. I went to them and I was like, hey, I really need to make more money. Like, I come in on my days off. Like, I work really hard. Like, you guys are only requiring me to be here 3 days a week, and I come in 5 days a week. Like, come on. Like, I need more money. I can't live. And he was like, yeah, we just don't have any more money to pay you. And I was like, they pay you? And he's like, well, no, I actually don't. I don't take money from this. I have other ways of making a living because I believe in this company so much. And I was like, yeah, Hayden, that's because your dad bought you 2 rental properties that you live off of. Like, I don't have that.
That's every CEO of every startup says that exact same thing. They say they don't take a paycheck. Number one, it's like a tax evasion thing. But also, like, it's just a lie. They don't take a paycheck, and then they have a credit card that is attached to the company's bank account, and then they just use that credit card to buy everything. So they don't personally take a paycheck, as in they are not paid through ADP to their own personal bank account, but they use the company's bank account as their own bank account and then just buy shit. So it's just a lie.
Yeah, it was bullshit. And that was, I think I quit a week later. I was just like, I physically can't do this. I'm starving. Like, I need money, which was actually for the best.
The almond coffer's drying up.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. It became an almond coffin.
There's nowhere to go for that. This episode's over.
I'm Dave Baker.
Richard watched this inspirational video thoroughly and took it very seriously. And according to him, with the words of that memo weighing on his mind, he was in a grocery store and noticed something. Frito products on the shelves were being bought, but only by one type of person, namely white people. Why? Because despite their Mexican theming and pseudo-Spanish names, the Frito Lay line of snacks were all fairly bland and didn't feature any of the kinds of seasonings or spices that were beloved by several generations of Hispanic Americans. And he realized one simple fact. The company was missing out on a lot of business by not releasing any products that appealed to the growing Hispanic population in the country. They needed something new, something with a little kick to it, which I love, even though, as we'll get to, this isn't necessarily like the reality of what actually happened, but I at least love that in his story, because you could frame this as like, oh, he just realized that they needed to like appeal to the Hispanic markets. But I love framing it as like he was at a store and he just realized white people are bitches. And then that was what gave him the idea for Flamin Hot Cheetos. He's like, these motherfuckers can't take shit.
These motherfuckers think Cool Ranch is spicy?
And that was what gave him the fucking magical light bulb. That's really, really funny to me. If not only because that was the piece in the story that he concocted. It's very funny. He immediately stormed home and confided in his wife. He needed to come up with a truly great idea that he could pitch to Roger and Rico. Something that would turn the company's fortunes around and potentially win back the jobs of all of his friends and save his own. An incredibly lofty goal for one janitor, but according to Richard, one that wouldn't end up being impossible. The couple set about gathering all the various spices, seasonings, and peppers that they had grown up eating in traditional Mexican dishes made by their families for generations, and they started experimenting. Richard took several bagfuls of Cheetos and other snack foods from his factory, and they started mixing together different combinations of their spices and trying them on the Cheetos. He wanted to take a brand new slurry, which is the name of the coating that is applied to snack foods to give them their flavor, and he wanted it to be aimed exclusively at people like him. After days of experimentation, they wound up with the winning concoction, a delicious and fairly spicy slurry that went perfectly on Cheetos and had enough kick to appeal to consumers with more adventurous taste buds. And this is where, according to Richard, the most significant historical moment in his life happened. He got on the phone and called the office of Roger Enrico. He was put through to Enrico's secretary, who, after hearing Richard's spiel about being a janitor from the Rancho Cucamonga factory, who had read Enrico's memo and had an idea he wanted to talk to him about, was miraculously put through to his office. They really must have been desperate. Right there on the phone, Richard pitched his idea to Enrico. He thought they were missing out on a lot of customers by not creating products for the Hispanic market, and he had invented a new type of snack slurry that would earn the company millions, maybe billions. And Enrico was moved by Richard's vision and initiative. He wanted to know more. He decided to give Richard a shot. He'd be in town in 2 weeks, and he was going to line up a meeting where he'd bring in several executives from PepsiCo and Frito Lay to hear Richard's pitch. He'd done it. He'd finally gotten that once-in-a-lifetime chance to finally make something big of his life, and he was not going to squander it. He bought the first suit and tie he'd ever owned, gathered several sample bags of his newly created spicy Cheeto snack, went to the library and did a bunch of research on marketing, and wrote a big presentation to give at the meeting. And 2 weeks later, Enrico arrived at the Rancho Cucamonga plant and brought Richard into the pitch meeting. I think this is him telling the story of the event.
I went to an old store and I bought a tie for $3.50, and my neighbor actually tied it for me. So here I am, I'm getting ready, and guess what? I'm doing pretty good. I'm presenting it. But as I said, there's always somebody in the room that'll try to steal your destiny, right? Well, it was going too good. And one of the marketing executives says, well, I have a question. I'm like, oh, no questions. So he said, well, Richard, tell me, just how much market share are you talking about? Inside, I almost fainted. It was that little boy with the burrito again. Like, oh my God, what am I doing here? I need to run out. I need to get out of here. I need to just like, I'm just a janitor. And I remember I thought for a moment, market share, I haven't read that chapter yet. You know, I don't have a whole lot of things, but one thing that I do have, and I'm going to give you the antidote to fear right now. Get a hold of what I'm about to say right now. You'll never be afraid again. Because one thing I do have is I have courage. Here's where I got it. Go back to the 3rd grade. It all happened for me in the 3rd grade. Every Tuesday, 2 trailers would pull up. They were after-school reading programs. One was for the non-Latino kids, and the other one was for the Latino kids. Well, one Tuesday, I'm in line. The line that I was told to get into. Get in that line, Richard. That's your line. Well, guess what I did one Tuesday? I broke ranks. And I got in the white line. You should have heard, my friends. Looking at me. Ricardo, estás loco. You're in the wrong line. This is your line. This is where they told us to get in. This is the truth. I looked inside. 2 beautiful blonde ladies at the trailer. I looked at them, and I looked at my friends. This is the truth. I said this. They have cookies inside. I'm going to get us some cookies. So as I got closer, something got a hold of me. Fear like I've never had. I was afraid. I was afraid of being rejected. I was afraid that those 2 ladies were going to say, get out of this line. You belong over there. When I got there to the front, what do you think those 2 ladies did? They filled my pockets with cookies. Here's the moral of that story, because you're probably wondering, what does that have to do with anything? Here it is. There's a cookie that's been baked for each one of you. Your job is to get out of that line that they told you to get in and get into the cookie line. The other thing that you got to get a hold of. Why did I get in that line? I was hungry. When you're hungry for that degree, fear will leave. When you're hungry for that promotion, fear will leave. When you're hungry to start that business, fear will leave. Remember, it's hunger, the antidote to fear. When you're hungry for that thing that you want to accomplish, you won't be afraid. So let's go back, and I'll answer that question when he said, how much market share? You see, many times I've said this, greatness will come in a ridiculous form. Many times you may have to look ridiculous. If you're a leader, sometimes you got to look beyond the ridiculous statement and see, I was fortunate because I had vision. And this is what vision did for me. When other people saw what I was, vision saw what I would become. The very thing that disqualified me, vision used to qualify me. So answering the question, you know, when you go to the store, the supermarkets, what they're called gondolas, when you see all the chips, the gondolas. Well, when he said, how much market share? With the most ridiculous smile, I thought about it, I said, oh, I got it. That much market share. How ridiculous is that? And you know what the CEO did? He stood up and he said, ladies and gentlemen, do you realize that we have the opportunity to go after that much market share? There was a young man in that room who today is the CEO of Pepsi. He stood up and he told his sales team, sales, do you think we can go get that market share? What I'm saying is, many times, greatness will come in a ridiculous form. Are you willing to look ridiculous?
So, number one, somebody's trying to steal my destiny is a badass phrase. Apropos of nothing. That's badass. But also, first of all, that's Richard Montañez. We actually haven't looked at a picture of him yet, so that's him. This story, but more specifically, the part when he says that much market share and he holds his arms out wide, kind of becomes like his catchphrase, or it's like the thing he tells that story everywhere he goes. If he does a shortened version of his story that doesn't, he has these long speaking tours where he speaks for like 3 hours and tells this whole life story and all this stuff. But even when he goes and does a public speaking where he'll speak for like 5 minutes, he always at least tells that little snippet with the this much market share piece. And it's like his did I do that? That he says all the time. And it's obviously, once again, just a very inspirational, very motivational, very charismatic story. And when you hear that, you're like, fuck yeah, Richard, fuck yeah. It really inspired. And prior to knowing this stuff, like, I would feel the exact same way. I would watch that and be like, this is fucking badass. Richard is awesome. But you know, as we'll learn, as George Gershwin said, it ain't necessarily so. Or I guess he's a lyricist. Whoever wrote those lyrics, I don't know. Gershwin wasn't a lyricist. They loved his idea and thought it was just the thing to reinvigorate the company. They started producing this new product, Flamin Hot Cheetos, right on the Rancho Cucamonga factory line and selling it in a local test market. There was just one problem. It wasn't selling, like, at all. The product seemed to be a total bust, but Richard knew why. They weren't marketing it properly. Nobody knew about it, least of all its target audience of Hispanic Americans desperate for a spicy, seasoning-rich snack to appeal to their childhood nostalgia. Frito Lay was on the verge of pulling the plug on Flamin Hot Cheetos, but Richard couldn't let his dream die. So he took it into his own hands. He gathered together several of his friends and family from inside and outside the factory. They took hundreds of bags of Flamin Hot Cheetos and started a grassroots marketing campaign, taking the bags and giving them away for free on the streets, outside community events, and notably during Tupperware parties for Hispanic women. And over the next few months, sales of Flamin Hot Cheetos started exploding in the area. The way that Richard chose to market the product to Hispanic Americans was actually working, and the product was jumping in sales just by word of mouth alone. And the rest was history. After the success of Richard's grassroots launch of Flamin Hot Cheetos, it became one of the company's best-selling products in history. And Enrico hired Richards to be the head of Frito Lay market research for the Hispanic market. Richard went on to become a top executive at Frito Lay with the job title Vice President of Multicultural Sales and Marketing. He spent the next 42 years with the company, massively expanding their reach into the American Hispanic market and contributing to the corporation regaining its 50% plus market share in the snack food category. Eagle Snacks was eventually bought by another company and phased out, no longer posing a threat. Richard went on to write multiple books about his life story and touring the country as a speaker at colleges, foundations, and organizations, preaching his rags to riches narrative in order to inspire a new generation of Hispanic youth to work hard and become successful through creativity, grit, and determination in the face of adversity. He eventually retired from PepsiCo in 2020, but a few years earlier, in 2018, it was announced that Searchlight Pictures would be producing a film about his life and creation of Flamin Hot Cheetos called Flamin Hot. The movie was written by Linda Yvette Chavez and Louis Colick, directed by Eva Longoria in her directorial debut, starring Jesse Garcia as Richard, and was released on June 9th of 2023 on Hulu and Disney+. The movie essentially is a retelling of the aforementioned story with some creative liberties taken with the sequence of events and characters that were involved. But ultimately, it was pretty accurate to Richard's telling of the events. And that was that. Richard had accomplished what was seemingly impossible in the late 1970s as an illiterate, unemployed drug dealer. He became a living legend and secured his legacy as the creator of one of the most beloved snacks in history. There was just one problem. The entire thing was a lie. Have you seen the movie Flamin Hot?
No, I have not. Have you?
Yeah, so I watched the movie Flamin Hot in preparation for this episode. And it, you know, there's sort of like two aspects to it. The first one is there's this particular brand of movie that is coming out a lot these days, and you know, there's like the bigger budget theatrical versions of it. Like we've seen a trend of these like corporation movies, you know, like the movie about Air Jordans. There's one other one I forget that like actually were like big budget movies that came out in theaters and had like big movie stars in them, right? And I mean, to be fair, I haven't seen any of them, so I can't even say if they're good or not, but they're just something I have zero interest in watching, really. But then there's like a second class of that, which is like that, but it's like the made for streaming kind of like low budget, like B grade ones. And there's a bunch of them. There's the Blackberry movie that has Glenn Howerton from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia in it, and Jay Baruchel. There is the Atari movie that has that kid from Kingsman. And there's Taron Egerton. There's a couple other ones, and then there's this one. And they're all these like mid-budget, made-for-streaming corporate story, corporate origin story movies. And the other one I was going to say is it's not really corporate origin, but it feels like a similar thing, like a rags to riches rise of like a something in like the business, but it's that movie Dumb Money about the guy Roaring Kitty who caused the GameStop stock thing to happen. And I've seen the Dumb Money movie as well because I had to watch it for a branded campaign for work. Otherwise, I would have never watched it, but I did for a project. And I've seen like most of the BlackBerry movie. They all have this particular quality to them where like the filmmakers, the people who are making these movies, they don't recognize like what a movie's supposed to be. And usually like even whenever you make a movie that's like about a real person and it has like this rags to riches or whatever, there's usually like something else that the movie is saying, like The Social Network. It's a movie about the rise of Facebook, but there's something else entirely that the movie is actually about, right? It's not just about Mark Zuckerberg creating Facebook. It's about something entirely different. The movie is about how far you'll go and how many bridges you'll burn and how much you'll alienate yourself from your community and your friends and family and support system in order to achieve success. That's what the movie is about. It's not about Facebook. These movies are just literally about these things. They're not saying anything else.
This kind of goes back to that thing. We debated doing an episode about this topic a while ago because we were talking late at night like we do. And I said something to the effect to you of, do you think that the myth of the great American novel is still the ultimate aspiration for American life? You know, because in the first half of the 19th century, or the 1900s, sorry, in the first half of the 20th century, that was like the pinnacle of achievement culturally. You know, people left their jobs. People, aspired to write the great American novel. That was like the thing everyone wanted to do. And then at a certain point, that idea faded away. And the idea of becoming like an auteur filmmaker, I feel like, supplanted that. Everybody wants their life to be made into a movie, their life to be made into a show. They have a movie they want to make. And that has kind of supplanted the idea of being a novelist. And now, in like the last maybe 20 years or so, that idea, I think, has kind of been subsumed by being the next CEO, the next Steve Jobs, the next Bill Gates, the next, Elizabeth Holmes, right? And I think the thing that you're talking about, this idea that like business porn and business as a genre is so prevalent in our culture that I feel like that is interrelated into this conversation of like, the idea, if the novel is dead and making a piece of media is dead, but now the ultimate aspiration of the American dream is to run a company, what greater fulfillment of that archetype than would be a, rags to riches American immigrant? Well, he's not an immigrant, but you know what I mean? A Mexican-American guy who can barely read or write, rising to be a executive and creating this beloved product, right? Like that to me checks all those boxes of that conversation that we were having and is fascinating. The problem being the things that get produced about it, like Social Network is the exception that proves the rule pretty much. I think that film is fantastic. The Beanie Babies movie, not so much. You know what I mean? Like there's so many of these We Crash, really? We really need a 8-episode series or whatever it is starring fucking, Jared Leto about WeWork? I don't know, man.
And the thing is that they're just, like I said, they're just about the story on its face. There's nothing more. So it really is like you're saying, it's almost just, it's a hollow representation of that achievement. The ultimate achievement of doing this, this rags to riches story, becoming, creating a business or becoming a top executive at a corporation or whatever. And then that achievement is like set in stone by making this film. But the film itself is this like hollow face value representation of that achievement rather than having anything actually interesting to say as like movies are supposed to. And usually whenever people make, movies about real life events, they're not just like telling that story. They're using that story as a jumping off point to tell a story that has a little bit more meaning to it.
Yeah, it reflects something about the human condition, theoretically. And it's not just a Wikipedia article.
Yeah, but none of these movies, like that Dumb Money movie, it's literally just like, this is what happened. First this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. It's fucking boring as hell. And the Flamin' Hot movie is a little bit more entertaining than the Dumb Money movie, but not much more. And I will say that the guy who plays Richard Montañez, Jesse Garcia, He's a charismatic, likable actor, and I actually would like to see him in more things because he was probably the best part about the movie. He was just funny and like entertaining to watch and charismatic, and I wouldn't mind him seeing him in other things. But aside from that, it's just like I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this, and then I became a success. End.
Here's my next question. How much of that do you think is related to the thing that we're going to be talking about next episode? And how much of that is related to Eva Longoria maybe not being like a visionary auteur?
I mean, it's a combination of both, I think. I think that like this movie, you know, for lack of a better way of describing it, it was just kind of like phoned in a little bit. Like, you know, you write a first draft of something and then you expect to like write 6 more drafts of it and then have to rewrite the entire script from scratch and then write 6 drafts of that before it gets to a place where somebody is willing to do anything with it. But then they just look at the first draft and like, looks great, let's do it. That's like what this feels like. It feels like they just wrote like a first draft of like, oh, this is just this story. Let's go back and rewrite it to like kind of restructure it and add a little bit more to it. But then they just made that. And that could be an aspect of like Eva Longoria just not having like as authoritative as a directorial voice, that she didn't look at the script and say, this needs more work before it's a real movie. And instead she just was like, sounds great. It's really motivational. Let's make this.
Yeah, because most of the directorial stuff she's done has been TV, right? Let me look. Yeah. Jane the Virgin, Devious Maids, The Mick, Blackish, Why Women Kill. And then she directed a movie called La Guerra Civil, which is the Civil War, Gordita Chronicles. Yeah, so it's all kind of light and fluffy single camera comedy stuff, which like, you know, that kind of makes sense for her. You know, she's a great actor. She's got great comedic timing. You know, I think that, you know, working, directing shows of that ilk makes a lot of sense for her. And that's kind of the vibe that I got from that Flamin' Hot trailer. Like I looked at it and was like, this looks like a made for TV movie, but like not a really great one.
It also has the exact vibe of those TV shows, those single camera comedies like Everybody Hates Chris or Young Rock. It has that exact vibe and aesthetic of like, there's a narrator and he's like, and this is when I did this thing. It looks and has the same vibe as one of those shows.
0% surprising to me. 0%. I think the thing that's more interesting about Richard's story though is the idea of that even in these stories of like the myth of American superiority and the myth of kind of, you know, you just got to work hard and you can do anything, that no man is an island, right? And I think it's really interesting that a lot of that gets sandblasted away in Caucasian communities because it absolutely is true. You know, people are giving friends jobs, people are giving friends and family members legs up and tips and strategies, or literally just hiring them or giving them money to start their businesses or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like, it absolutely happens in Caucasian circles.
And you want to minimize that stuff as much as possible. Like, you don't want anybody to know that stuff. You want to represent it as if you did as much of it as yourself as possible.
Right. Whereas the thing that's interesting and cool about Richard's story thus far is that not only is he a central figure in this narrative, but also that his culture is and his community is, and it literally doesn't happen without his community. Like, he's going and talking to his wife's Tupperware friend group and like being like, hey, if you want to try these snacks I made, check it out. And then they talk to the people that they talk to. And like, of course, yes, everything that's ever succeeded has happened that way. But there's a clearer line of kind of racial solidarity, which is really cool. So even when things are beneficial to a specific group or beneficial to everyone, but come from a specific racial group, you know, they get watered down and filed down and strip mined, and you know, now we have Eminem.
I didn't know that was where that was going, but
I mean, but you understand the point I'm making, right?
Yes.
Like maybe I shouldn't have said Eminem because he's quote unquote the great one. You know, now we have fucking Mac Miller and fucking What's the kid's name?
Mac Miller. Isn't the guy that's dead?
Yeah, he's dead as fuck. No, the other kid, Macklemore. That's who I was trying to say. Macklemore.
Yeah, I mean, your references are a little old. I feel like the right one is whatever that guy. I don't even know his fucking name. The guy who's in that White Men Can't Jump remake.
Oh yeah. That guy. Yeah. Now we have that fucking guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I agree, and it's interesting because. You know, I don't want to like give away too much, but like as we go on and when we get into the next episode where we get into the real story, kind of like the community aspect of it is one of the major components that ends up being actually true. And that's really interesting.
I'm Dave Baker.
And I'm Spandrew Spice.
This has been Deep Cuts. If you'd like to find me on the internet, you can do so at heydavebaker.com. Or if you're going to be in San Diego this week, July 24th or whatever the fuck, come to San Diego Comic-Con and meet me. I'll be there selling books. Booth 2203, San Diego Comic-Con. So if you want to come hang out, talk comics, podcasts, I'll be there. Spandrew, where can people find you on the internet?
You won't be meeting me at San Diego Comic-Con on the 24th or whatever the fuck, because I'm out of commission. I can't fucking move around. I could probably get there, but I don't want to hobble around with one fucking leg, so fuck that. But if you want to pay respects to the dear beloved Papa Price, you can get his book, Deadbolt AI Private Eye, by going to dapricerights.com. You can follow us on social media by going to Facebook and searching Deep Cuts Podcast. You can join the Facebook group, Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group, where we talk about the show and make memes. You can join our Discord server, bit.ly.com/DeepCutsDiscord, where we talk about the show, make memes, play games, and other cool stuff. You can follow us on Instagram at DeepCutsPod. You can follow us on TikTok at Mystery Treehouse. And you can follow me on TikTok at DeadBoyDetective, where I haven't posted in a while because I broke my fucking leg. Deal with it. Deep Cuts is a production by Boy Genius Media. If you'd like to find this show and others like it, please visit boygeniusmedia.com or deepcutspod.com.
If you want to join in on post-episode discussions, please join the Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group. Finally, subscribe to our YouTube channel for additional video content.
The incidental music for this episode was created by D. Catalano, whose music can be found at wekeepoddhours.bandcamp.com.